There can be no transgender justice without transnational solidarity. Hello, my name is Seongeun Kim. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a trans rights activist from South Korea. I'm currently living in Ottawa and I'm doing my master's study in sociology, a specialization in feminist and gender studies. My main research interests are around lived experiences of trans people. I think that is really important for me. And besides that, I'm a person who likes creating community spaces and also learning new things. And I'm also a person who tried to imagine a better future for not just only Korean trans people, but the trans people all around the world. And last but not least, I'm also a proud mom of 4 cats. Unlike many people see South Korea as it is still a very conservative society, especially around LGBTQ rights issues. There are a lot of stigma surrounding trans rights issues and LGBTQ people in Korea. For example, there is no legislative protections against discrimination of LGBTQ people. There is no anti-discrimination law, no hate crime laws, and there is no protection. There is actually a study conducted in 2021 regarding LGBTQ rights issues, and 70% of trans or LGBTQ people experienced some sort of discrimination in last year. And about 68% of people experience discrimination when they're trying to find a job, and 59% of trans people were in serious risk of suicide. Like I said, there is no legislative protections against discrimination, and also the whole medical situation is also very difficult for trans people because many gender-affirming care that trans people needs isn't still covered by national insurance systems. So me and other trans people have to pay extreme amounts of money every month to even go through those kind of medical treatments and medical transitions. There's also on the same study I mentioned earlier, the national average health report, I should say, was around 4.28% out of 5 for the national average, but for trans women, it was only about 2.9. So you can see general health situation for trans people is quite low relative to the national average. Another difficulty trans people face is regarding gender marker change. South Korea requires a lot of legal documentations and procedures in order to get your gender marker changed and recognize the gender you desire to be. You need to get proof of years of medical transition, and also you need to get, funnily enough, your parents' consent, even if you're an adult. So it is quite nonsense. And the worst part of it all is you need to get castrated in order to get your gender marker changed. So it is quite a lot of eugenic practices happening still in South. And last but not least, for especially trans women in South Korea, a lot of people have to face conscription, because every person who got assigned male at birth in South Korea has to go to the military. And trying to get exempt from the service is another whole difficulties that trans people face every day. For example, for me, I had to go through at least 3 years of medical examinations in order to get exempt from the military service. So I got to first interact with Canadian trans community through trans communities on internet. I was there to get more information about what trans people experience and like another like other useful like informations. And while I was there, I met wonderful trans people who are from Canada, and through them I got to learn the situation is relatively better here in Canada. And also besides that, a lot of my friends, not just even like trans friends, but also like LGBTQ fled South Korea to Canada or United States or into New Zealand. And seeing all that, like really wanted to like also flee from South Korea out of this like really oppressive like society. And like after like a few years in undergrad, I had an opportunity to actually visit the United States as a like kind of a language exchange program. And while I was in New York, especially, the what things I experienced that there were really quite different than what I've experienced in South Korea. Like everyone, at least everyone I met in New York, respected my identity, respected my pronouns, and respected my chosen names. And after experiencing all that and having to go back to Korea it was quite difficult. It is quite difficult to go back to this kind of oppressive society after you have experienced what could be possible. So after all that, I finally decided to flee South Korea, and I decided Canada is at least my best option for my well-being. When people respect my pronouns and treat me as I like to be, it is quite a euphoric experience. Like you feel comfortable and you feel like you actually exist in this world, because when people doesn't respect and deny my identity, it not only it feels horrible, but I feel like I'm detached from this world. I feel like I'm a kind of like a ghost hovering around, I should say, on this earth. And yeah, it feels like I don't exist, and people doesn't care if I exist or not. And it can get really difficult for your mental health and your physical well-being, going through all that kind of denial of your identity. So like my main activism focuses on two fronts. First being giving visibility and voice to Korean trans people, and another one help building a community space where trans people can feel safe and feel included. So speaking of like giving voice to Korean trans people, while I was in like undergrad, I was in one of the LGBTQ clubs in university, and our main goal was to show to the people that queer people exist around in the society, because like I said, in Korea, the like whole queer visibility is quite low, and people doesn't realize that trans or like LGBTQ people exist around them. So for those kind of effort, we place like posters or banners around the campus to show that we exist. And there's like also a place where other queer folks can join in and feel included. We've also did a kind of little anthology book themed around queer experiences. We each wrote like essays or poems depicting and describing our experiences as LGBTQ people, and we've gathered all that work together and create a little book, and we've distributed it throughout the libraries or the bookstores around the neighborhood. And furthermore, we also participated in queer art exhibition. It's kind of like an exhibition like aims also towards like showing the queer experiences in Korea. And my essays also got displayed in one of those exhibitions too. And this kind of work also continues still in Canada while I'm here, especially in Canadian universities, because many of the trans discourse in Canada still mainly focuses on Canada, North America, and a lot of it is still very, very white-centric. And I would like to break that kind of discourse and try to share my experience as a Korean trans person whose experience is quite different from what Canadian trans experience is. So through that, I'm trying to raise my voice and share my experiences as a Korean trans person in Canadian university and also in Canadian trans communities too. And speaking of to build safe community spaces for trans people, while I was in LGBT club in Korea, I've organized a book club where we read through books themed around like queer theories or trans rights discourse and also feminism. And it was a chance for like LGBTQ people to speak about our experiences and share them with other queer folks and make sense of it, I should say. And it was also like a kind of an opportunity for us to finally learn knowledge that is created by queer people that are outside of racist, gender, heteronormative academic society. And also, building upon that, I'm trying to see if I could start volunteering at this place called Ottawa Trans Library here. It is created by this wonderful lady called Tara, and the whole like trans library is centered around preserving trans histories and building also a community space. And I would really like to start another book club there to do the similar work I've done throughout during my undergrad years. I faced like so many challenges while I was like working as a like trans activist, but also like just living as a trans person every day, not just in Korea, but also in Canada. Most of the challenges related to general transphobia and homophobia still surrounding us in our society. For example, while I was doing like work at the LGBT club during my undergrad, the banners and the posters I mentioned earlier, it got torn apart by some random stranger. And seeing that kind of like violence was quite traumatizing for all of us, very demoralizing, and it is quite hard to continue our work seeing all this kind of hatred towards us. And besides that, like I don't want to get into too much about this, but there's also like challenges with my family. This is kind of things that also other like trans and queer folks have to experience and endure. So many of them I've seen like have housing insecurities because of troubles with their family, and those kind of things is always present, still present in our community. Also, there is a problem with legal accessibility here. Of course, in Korea, it was really hard for me, difficult for me to get my gender marker changed because like all the documents and the medical procedures I have to get in order to get my gender marker changed. But at least in Canada, the procedure is relatively simple. But when I was in the city hall trying to get my gender marker changed to female, they still require me to get on letter from Ontario medical professional here. I know it is relatively simple than in Korea, but the whole medical situation in Canada, it is really difficult for trans people to afford those kind of medical appointments and even to get on appointment itself. So even requiring that to prove that you're trans enough in order to get your gender marker change was quite of a challenge. But luckily enough, I found a medical practitioner here in Ottawa, and through her support, I was able to get my gender marker changed. Like I said, in Korea, medical insurance isn't available for trans people, so like we have to pay a lot of money to even get like gender affirming care. But even here in Canada, the things that I need to get in order to even like survive, like crucial hormones, some of the forms aren't even like covered by the insurance system. And even to get the medicine itself, I have to travel like hours outside the city, even to get to a pharmacy that provides me with those kind of medication. So medical accessibility is still a lot of problem here in Canada, and whole like wait list regarding gender affirming surgeries, and even to get on like a gender specialist to even start the hormones is really quite of a challenge for every trans people here in Canada. And lastly, the whole like trans rights discourse and queer rights discourse here in Canada is very white-centric and very North American-centric. So for trans people who are people of color or immigrants, it is really hard for us to feel included in those kind of spaces. Personally, I felt like my experiences doesn't matter in those kind of communities, and I often felt I was being alienated in those kind of communities. So trying to be included in those kind of communities was also quite of a challenge for me too. Of course, relatively speaking, Canada's LGBTQ rights status is ahead from like other countries, but still there's a lot of like challenges and limitation, I should say, are still present here in Canada too. For example, one of the things I seen here in Canada is like very like anti-homeless architectures here. There is the bench in Bank Street decorated with like rainbows and like queer symbols there, but there's like a huge barrier middle of the bench to prevent homeless people from lying down on there. And this is quite like hypocritical because a lot of trans and queer folks are homeless and are in danger of being homeless. And we cannot separate these issues, like homeless issues and queer issues, from apart because it's all interconnected. You cannot say that you care for like trans or LGBTQ people while you are disregarding homeless people or indigenous people, because they are like queer indigenous people, they are homeless indigenous people, and like queer people exist in Canada in many different forms. And just to show off that you are like accepting of like LGBTQ people doesn't mean that you're actually providing support and it is actually livable for trans or LGBTQ folks here in Canada. You need to see those kind of issues together and care for that together. I think my work has really helped people to realize that there are like different forms of trans experiences, and also what kind of experiences trans people have to face every day, not just to like cisgender heterosexual folks, but also within LGBT communities. For example, the whole like exhibitions I mentioned earlier, I wrote an essay about the things I've heard as a trans person while also living very bigoted and very discriminatory things. And after displaying that, one of my friends in LGBTQ club came up to me and said, "Wow, I didn't know that you had to go through and listen to all that. I wouldn't have imagined that." And like this shows like it is quite hard for even other LGBTQ folks to even imagine what kind of things trans people have to go through during their life. And also, furthermore, my work has done to break this kind of like very image of South Korea as a like really progressive nation, because whenever I talk about my experience in South Korea to Canadian people or like Canadian trans communities, they get really horrified of the things I have, like especially like when I was speaking about my experience with the military conscription system I've experienced in Korea. Other like Canadian trans folks got really surprised that the things Korean trans people have to experience is quite different the Canadian trans experience. So like this example shows, I think my work has done to show that different trans lives can exist throughout the world. And also like creating spaces where trans people can feel included and feel accepted. Of course, like those kind of spaces are really important for trans people because there aren't that many places where trans people can like share their experiences and talk about their experiences, and not just even for me but other people too. Creating those kind of spaces is really important for our well-being. Starting a book club was really meaningful for a lot of like trans and LGBTQ folks, because speaking about our experiences in this kind of spaces and learning about our own histories and creating our knowledge, it's kind of hard to find those kind of opportunities because the mainstream academic world is very much like cisgender and non-queer centric. So I think in a way doing those kind of book clubs and making those kind of spaces, bringing our own subjectivity and agency back from those kind of mainstream societies and placing us as a subject of our own history and subjects of our own knowledge. So creating a safe community spaces and giving voice to Korean trans people has been quite, I think, done a meaningful work for like trans people, not just in Korea but also in Canada too.